Hello and welcome, everyone. I want you to preemptively control your breath and find your inner peace because I can already tell this one is going to piss people off for some reason. Motorcyclists take so much pride in the brands they choose to simp for, as if the automotive toys they purchase not only define their whole personality, but will also determine the fate of the entire universe. And the minute you upset someone's perception of that brand, these simps are unable to comprehend reality and get worked up and throw a little hissy fit. Boomers and rednecks always talk about buying American as if that is going to save the country from the cyclical economic dumpster fires it is like to peek their head around the corner every 20 years, but by now, we all know that sentiment is asinine. Plenty of manufacturers, cars, and motorcycles both make, manufacture, or assemble, whatever clever language they want to use, their products all over the world for cheaper labor and to avoid high importing tariffs. Not to mention, every single manufacturer uses parts from all over the world already. Why would they not if you're able to buy from reputable brands at cheap wholesale prices? I mean, do you want your R1 to cost $18,000 or $50,000? You may have already been aware of this in regards to the auto industries, but motorcycles are no different. Here we go. Your motorcycle wasn't made where you think it was. Today's video is brought to you by us over at shop.yamanoob.co. I'll talk more about all those fine, genuine American products we sell later in the video. Before we get started, be sure to click the notification bell to make sure you get notified every time we upset your perception of motorcycling. I know it stings, but that is how you grow. Okay, let's get started. Let's start with Honda. I feel like this is a good place to start, considering that they have a massive global footprint. Honda is a Japanese company. Their bikes are made in Japan and they're shipped all over the world, right? Yep, video over. Thanks for watching. Just kidding, that would be too easy. The more places motorcycles are being sold, the more likely a manufacturer is to produce bikes in or near that country. For instance, Honda has had a plant in Marysville, Ohio, where they make cars and SUVs for the American market, and up until 2009, they used this facility to produce big stock and cruisers for the American market as well, like the Goldwing and the Valkyrie models. While this plant no longer produces motorcycles, Honda still has dozens of different factories around the world making bikes. The Grom, Rebel 300, and Rebel 500 are all made in Thailand, while the larger, more expensive Rebel 1100 is made in Japan. Bikes like the Honda 599 and the CB600F were designed for the European market, so they were built in Italy to avoid importing tariffs. While the 919 Hornet was built in Japan alongside their superbikes like the CBR 600RR and the CBR 1000RR, Honda manufactured their smaller bikes all over the world depending on where they intended to be sold. Bearing in mind their small motorcycles like the Super Cub are their most popular bikes, you will find a large portion of their motorcycles made outside of Japan that are lower displacement, inexpensive type commuter bikes. Honda has dozens of facilities in over 25 countries, but they currently manufacture motorcycles in Japan, Thailand, Brazil, Bangladesh, and India, to name a few. Not that this should mean much to any of you. At the end of the day, it is still a Honda built to the same scrupulous, nerdy standards as every other Honda. You don't see people being like, man, my Grom broke down all the time because it was made in Thailand. The unspeakable acts Grom owners do to these motorcycles without consequence should be proof enough that there is no difference in manufacturing quality across Honda's global production. While it makes sense that such a global, high-volume company like Honda makes motorcycles all over the world, can the same be said for a company that heavily relies on nationality as an integral part of their brand, say, Ducati, for instance? Ducati is headquartered in Bologna, Italy. They are owned by Lamborghini, which is Italian, but Lamborghini is owned by Audi, which is owned by the Volkswagen Group, which is obviously a German company. Despite the amount of American dweebs with their VW stance cars on bags with their windows stained with vape juice. I don't really care about these ownership technicalities, really, because I'm a sensible person, but since we're talking about globalization, I gotta put it out there. And made in Italy is pretty important for Ducati's brand. A vast majority of motorcycles are made by Ducati in Italy, with an exception for motorcycles that are assembled in Thailand or Brazil for local markets to avoid local importing tariffs. The frames and engines are all still built in Bologna, but before getting shipped overseas for final assembly. The only stipulation is the Ducati Scrambler, where all models are assembled in Thailand, which might contribute to why the Scrambler is one of the most accessibly priced models in Ducati's lineup. And if it hurts your feelings to know that your Ducati Scrambler wasn't 100% made in Italy, that sucks for you. Maybe you should have ponied up an extra 10 grand and gotten a real Ducati. Is that going to be a meme now? As if Ducatis needed another reason to be holier than thou. I'm an American man. I believe in American values. God, guns, and country. I do right by family, and I believe in supporting the American economy. That's why I voted for George W. Bush, and it's also why I ride a Harley Davidson. This has been brought to you by the Coalition for Protecting American Jobs. I bet all the HD haters are chomping at the bit for me to blow the lid off of some massive Harley-Davidson conspiracy about how their bikes are all made by Chinese school children before being slapped with a made in Milwaukee badge and sold to dentists for 30 grand, but unfortunately, that is not the case. All Harley-Davidson motorcycles sold in the US are manufactured in the US, with the caveat being that many of their parts are sourced from outside of the country. Not unlike pretty much every other motorcycle manufacturer, but similarly to Ducati, Harley assembles motorcycles at plants in India, Thailand, and Brazil for sale in local markets. They've actually been working with a company in China to manufacture small displacement motorcycles for the Asian market, but the details on that are not 100% yet. The HD boardroom realized that other countries aren't as infatuated with Americana and heritage as the good old US of A, and wouldn't be willing to pay even higher than normal Harley prices on motorcycles. As a result, Harley moved production overseas to try to avoid tariffs that would create an even higher than normal price for non-American markets. The only motorcycles from Harley that were made overseas for domestic sales were the Street 500 and 750 models. These bikes were designed for beginners who don't have a trust fund, so production had to be done overseas to keep the price low. Even though they still cost over $8,000 brand new, so I guess it's low relative to Harley. While most motorcycles from Harley-Davidson are still in fact American, you can bet all their branded t-shirts, wallets, dildos, and lingerie sets are not. Have you seen our new giveaway Sportster Roadster 1200 we have in the shop? We bought it secondhand, and you may have seen us giving it a little TLC in the shop to get it back to tip-top shape. A lot of the parts we've been using and more can be found on shop.yammynoob.co. We've got all the necessary parts to improve the stock HD shortcomings like Arlen Ness grips, progressive shocks, and even a Vance & Hines slip-on exhaust. You can't have a Harley-Davidson and have stock grips, suspension, or exhaust. Come on now. All of these parts are made in the USA, and we'll be staying true to the Harley experience. Head over to shop.yammynoob.co to check it out. We got parts for your other motorcycles as well if you're not an HD simp yet. Use our year, make, and model feature to find parts for your bike. Plus, every dollar you spend gets an entry to win one of our giveaway bikes. So maybe you'll end up winning the Roadster, and you'll realize what it's like to ride a real bike. Triumph is another motorcycle manufacturer whose brand relies heavily on their British heritage. They're considered one of the most iconic British motorcycle companies after all. While that is hard to deny, many of their motorcycles are not actually made or assembled in England. Triumph claims all their research, design, and engineering happens at their headquarters in Hinckley, Leicestershire. Sure, fine. Triumph has production outside of England, which they refer to as global manufacturing flexibility. They operate 2 factories in Hinckley, 3 factories in Thailand, and 1 in Brazil. While some may say that makes their motorcycles less British, I feel that there is nothing more British than expanding an empire into corners of the world to utilize cheap labor. Maybe we need to throw out Triumphs into the Boston Harbor in protest, but really, if you hadn't caught on by now, everybody's doing this. It's just the way globalized industries work. But unlike Ducati or Harley-Davidson, the Triumph factories in Thailand and Brazil aren't just producing motorcycles for local markets, they supply almost all of Triumph's motorcycles for every market, including Europe and the US. While most of Triumph's production has slowly shifted to Thailand since the early 2000s, higher-end bikes like the Speed Triple, Tiger 1200, and Rocket 3 remained on the roster for motorcycles made at the Hinckley factory in England. And I'm also pretty sure the Daytonas were made there too, but I could be wrong. Since 2020, these bikes were also shifted to Thailand, which now leaves the Hinckley existence solely as a headquarters for design, engineering, and research and development. The only motorcycles still produced there are the super limited Triumph factory custom models. So yeah, your Bonneville was made in Thailand. It's not that really big of a deal in my opinion, but I'm sure someone somewhere didn't think to Google it and is now heartbroken. I'm sure most of the KTM and Husky simps are already privy to this info, but most of the smaller displacement bikes from KTM and Husky are currently made in India. Duke 390, India. Svartpilen 401, India. They're also made by Bajaj Auto, an Indian company that owns a 49% stake in KTM. Bajaj makes all of KTM's small displacement Duke bikes for the Indian market and exports the 200, 390, and Husqvarna Svart and Vitpilen 401s to the US. The flagship KTM models like the 690 and 1290 models are still made in Austria, although it is rumored that KTM had been partnering with Chinese motorcycle company CF Moto to manufacture certain KTM models like the former 790 and 890 bikes in China and to supply CF Moto with a patent for their parallel twin engines. This is all pretty new development, so it's hard to know definitively what is happening, but based on KTM's own track record for problematic motorcycles, it stands to reason that this collaboration and outsourcing of manufacturing couldn't hurt. There was a lot of chatter on the KTM owners forums essentially saying, can a KTM made in China really be any worse? And those coming from people who enjoy their bikes from KTM. I'm sure we'll be seeing more about this in the coming months, since anything with China in the name is sure to get tons of clicks. Well, there you go, folks. That is a quick little foray into the harsh realities of global motorcycle markets. For the vast majority of manufacturers, they're making motorcycles wherever the hell they can. If someone sells a lot of bikes in India, it makes sense to make them in India. Or if it means they can sell high-quality bikes for cheaper than they can to do all over the manufacturer in their country where they were headquartered, then so be it. Most small displacement beginner bikes are made in India, Indonesia, and Thailand regardless of the manufacturer, and more people having access to motorcycling is better for the industry than a bunch of ethnocentric boomers espousing their criticisms of overseas manufacturing while simultaneously complaining about how high prices have gotten. Weird. We're going to see motorcycles coming from countries like China becoming increasingly common, and while the jury is still out on their long-term reliability and craftsmanship, it is hard to deny that many people's rejection of the idea of a well-made Chinese motorcycle is based on their underlying prejudices. I don't want no damn Chinese junk next to my hog. It's gonna leach toxins into the water supply and give me my family some communist cancer. Thanks for watching the video. Be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell if you can see it through your tears. I appreciate you watching. Fact, in the 1880s, hosiery businessman LaMarcus Thompson hated that Americans were tempted by hedonistic practices like saloons and brothels, so he set out to straighten up one of the most immoral places he could think of, Coney Island in New York. There he built America's first roller coaster to give New Yorkers some good, clean fun away from the seedier pastimes. Why not both? Goodbye. Well, look at you. You've made it to the end of another Yammy Noob video. You should consider yourself pretty lucky because I have curated this one right over here for you to continue watching. It's probably just as good as the one you just saw. Unless you hated the one you just saw. I don't know, maybe leave me a comment down below about how much you hated it as well too. Or just keep watching this one. Make sure you keep watching Yammy Noob. Don't forget to keep watching Yammy Noob. That's the most important thing. Keep watching Yammy Noob.